As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep, put pucks in deep. We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
The Americans beat Pakistan, pulling off the greatest upset in cricket history. Dr. Pepper passed Pepsi as the country's second favorite soda brand, and the Fifth Liners podcast is now live. Welcome to everybody tuning in here, episode 1, and we're extremely excited for what is to come here, hopefully for years, as we break down today the Eastern and Western Conference Finals for the NHL and the upcoming Stanley Cup between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers, and through the upcoming summer and seasons to come, breaking hockey news here on the new podcast. And extremely excited to welcome the co-hosts here, and we'll have everyone go around and introduce themselves in just a second. But Colin Kapoor, George Bannister, and Jenna Bonomo, all alongside myself, Casey Ditzel. Colin, we'll send it over to you first here. Welcome to the podcast, and let us know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I'm super excited for everyone out there listening to this podcast, episode 1. This is something that I've been really excited about since it was announced, since Casey, you spearheaded this project. So to let everyone know a little bit about myself, I'm currently a student at Northeastern University. Like Casey, I am a hockey play-by-play broadcaster. That is the aspiration for me. Currently, I am in Wisconsin as the TV broadcaster for a Northwoods League team called the Wisconsin Rapids Raptors. I am from Washington, D.C., and you'll hear that a lot during our conversations here today and going forward. You'll get to know my homerism a little bit more. But I go to school in Boston from D.C., and I'm here in Wisconsin this summer. Casey, George, Jenna, cannot wait to get this going with you guys. It's going to be a blast.
Another broadcaster. We'll send it over now to George.
Hey, everybody. We're super excited to be here. When I got the phone call from Casey, I was just through the roof that he even asked me to be a part of this project. I'm so excited to get talking about hockey, my favorite sport since I was 6 years old, living in Anchorage, Alaska, seeing my neighbor with a rink in the backyard, wondering, what the heck is that? And I found out it was hockey, and I fell in love. And my favorite team are the Rangers. Wearing my Broadway blue shirt right here, my Ryan McDonough captain jersey. No offense, Colin. This is my team. We can still be friends. Don't worry. But I'm really excited to get going here with everybody.
And not an on-air college hockey personality, but working for the Clarkson Golden Knights, Jenna Bonomo, getting her first touch of on-air time here. Jenna.
Yep. Thanks, Casey. I'm super excited to be part of this podcast, and I'm super excited to see where it goes. But just a little about me. I'm Jenna. I'm from Utica, New York, home of the Utica Comets in the AHL. Like he said, I'm an NCAA live television director, and I also do social media, managing the Clarkson men's hockey account. And I'm just super excited to be here. So thank you.
Not any television director, but also my television director. I'm Casey Ditzel again, and the play-by-play voice for the Clarkson Golden Knights hockey team, and hosting the Fifth Liners podcast here. So let's get right into it. And big news in the NHL starting tomorrow as this podcast breaks here, Saturday, June 7th, the Stanley Cup Finals to be underway, and the Florida Panthers, who are Jenna's team, facing off against Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. And it's going to make up for quite the exciting battles here to prove if defense wins championships or if the offense of the Edmonton Oilers can get it done. So when you look at the breakdowns of the teams, Edmonton playing in their 8th Stanley Cup all time, their first in quite a while here. The last time they won a cup was 1990. And for Edmonton, they've won 5 of their 7 Stanley Cups. So, George, when you look at the bigger picture, which is the drought that Canada has been in, the last time Canada won a cup, 1993, which was the year the Florida Panthers joined the league. Do you think this is the year that the 30-year drought of Canada can come to an end here?
Well, if any team can do it, it's this Edmonton Oilers team. But I got to tell you, they have to do it in short term. They have to establish their gameplay early and get the series over early, because if they don't, the longer this series goes on, the more the Florida Panthers are going to be favored to come out on top.
Florida playing in their third cup now, their second consecutive cup. And Chris Knobloch with quite the statement on whether or not experience is going to matter. He doesn't seem to think so. A shot at the Buffalo Bills, my local team here, being from Rochester, New York. But when you look at whether or not experience matters here, and you talked about some of the important factors of the cup, Colin, where does that experience come in here with their second straight cup appearance?
I think it starts and ends with the goaltending here, Casey. I think that's the most important part of it, is that, yes, experience on one side for the Edmonton side. They have the talent to make up for that in some areas. But you look at Stuart Skinner and Sergei Bobrovsky, and we'll get into that a little bit later also. But I just think it's night and day with the body of work one guy has in Bobrovsky and the lack of playoff experience that Stuart Skinner has. And yes, he's been decent this playoff run, better than he was last year when the Oilers were dragging him, scratching and clawing across to the inevitable end of their playoff run. He's been better this time, yeah, but when you break it down in terms of experience, Bobrovsky has been there each and every year. When he's with the Panthers, he's been impeccable, and he's been able to do this in the playoffs before. So yes, Bobrovsky didn't finish the job with Florida last season, but I think that's just going to add more fuel to the fire for this entire Panthers team. And Knobloch, I mean, he's an NHL coach, right? He's been around the block, obviously not as much as Paul Maurice has, but I still think that the experience of this Florida Panthers team is going to be enough to get them over the hump. That and their style of play. But when you look at the two goaltenders, that's where that dichotomy really, really starts to rear its head, because Bobrovsky's been there and done that, and Stewart hasn't yet.
This will be the longest mileage all time for a Stanley Cup in NHL history, 2,540 miles between Edmonton and Sunrise, Florida. And not a common matchup, just 42 all-time meetings between Edmonton and the Florida Panthers. It is Edmonton leading that series 23-16-3 all-time. A little tighter recently, 4-4 since 2020 in the last 8 times. And a really interesting thing between that is the road team since 2020, each side is 3-1. So it'll be interesting to watch if we see the road teams, which in the Stanley Cup playoffs is not common, take over here in this cup final. Florida at home all time is 13-7-2, and Edmonton 10-9-1 all time between the two teams. Jenna, when you look at the way things break down, and you've been down there all playoffs going to the games in Sunrise, can the Panthers, one, go to Edmonton, go into that crazy house that they've got going, especially with all the atmosphere as of late that the Edmonton fans have been bringing, but also on the Sunrise side, can the Florida fans bring that same energy and make it difficult for Edmonton to go on the road?
Definitely. One thing I would like to mention first is the atmosphere in Florida has been absolutely insane this entire playoff run. I think they've really stepped it up. All the fans have been super supportive, so I think that's great. But definitely one thing that I would like to note is that Florida's a great away team. They're great on the road. They're able to shut teams down in their home arena. So I think they can get it done, definitely. But I think that the Oilers are going to have trouble definitely coming into Florida for game 1 and game 2, since the Panthers are going to be blazing out with fire out there. So I definitely think that, again, as Colin said, that Florida has the advantage of goaltending. Sergei Bobrovsky has had so much experience lately in the playoffs, and he's been playing great. Obviously, home ice for Florida is going to be tough, but I do think the Oilers have an advantage in special teams. Their power play has been absolutely insane. Definitely not comparable to Florida's right now, so they definitely need to step that up. But I think both teams have a fair chance. Depends on how they're going to take it. But I think, honestly, either can get it done, maybe a little bit harder for the Oilers, so.
Florida becoming the state of hockey right now, and this is now the 5th straight Eastern Conference champion coming out of Florida, looking back to the 3 straight Tampa Bay Lightning appearances, 2020, 2021, 2022. Now the Florida Panthers here in 2023, and this year consecutive cup appearances, and that's all at the helm of Paul Maurice. Took over last season, and now only the fourth coach in NHL history to reach consecutive Stanley Cup Finals in his first 2 years with the team. Jenna, what has made him specifically so successful?
A lot of the players have definitely commented on this in their own ways, but many have mentioned just his gritty and fast style play that he's created for this team. Definitely finishing checks and being physically demanding at all points of the game. Moving the puck quick can really be challenging for a team, especially on the road, especially when you have your home fans behind you. And I just think that the players admire his playing style and they really want to put it into their game and keep it going the entire game. It's going to be really tough for the other team.
Florida's really established themselves as one of the most defensively dominant teams in the NHL. And going back to the last series, we'll get into that later between New York and Florida. But in the special team side, Florida only took 16 penalties against the New York Rangers. Only one power play goal allowed against a Rangers power play that really cooked the Carolina Hurricanes the series before that. So statistically looking the way Edmonton's been, even if Edmonton keeps that 30 to 35% conversion rate on the power play, that's 5 power play goals for Edmonton at some point during the season. George, when we look at the way that Edmonton's offense has gone and relying specifically on the power play in a lot of these games that they've been able to win, if that's all they can get, those 5 power play goals, if that Florida Panthers penalty kill can tighten up, and it could be less than that as well, do the Oilers have enough to find 5-on-5 against the Florida Panthers?
You're looking at an Oilers team that had plus 57 scoring differential. Okay. Number 2 in the Western Conference. McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent, Hopkins combined for over 300 points. Okay. This is an explosive team. The Oilers had 765. Let that rattle around in your head a second. 765 high danger scoring chances, converting an NHL second best, 10.8% of those. Okay. But you got to look at the flip side as well. Does that matter? The Panthers' Corsi 5v5 was 56.2%. And now that's taken into account of puck control, right? 56.2 of the time, they're controlling the puck, and they're having a 55.3 high danger scoring percentage, which means they've created more chances than their opponent's 5v5. So it's going to be interesting to see here if Panthers tighten up and don't commit so many penalties and now shut down that Edmonton power play, what's going to come into play 5v5? Is it the lockdown of the 56.2% puck control, or is it the creation of that 3-headed monster of McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins?
Jenna, the captain of your team, Alexander Barkov, such a key piece both ways. He plays on the power play, he plays on the penalty kill, and he's one of the top 5-on-5 guys. You look at the 5-on-5 statistics in the first 3 rounds, his line against Nikita Kucherov, 0 goals for one of the NHL's best there. David Pastrnak, just 1 5-on-5 goal, and Artemi Panarin, just 1 5-on-5 goal. That is each team's regular season leading scorer there. Barkov getting it done all over the ice. What's made him so dominant, especially in the playoffs here? And it seems like every year he's one of those guys that shines in these situations.
Yeah, definitely face-offs. He's very good at winning face-offs. He's always back-checking, ready on defense. He's rarely caught out of position. And he just always has a great eye on the puck and always has great positioning.
Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk rematch here in the Stanley Cup with former Alberta foes, and the Battle of Alberta there when they played for the Calgary Flames. And looking at that, George, do you think any extra heat with those two guys returning here against this matchup of guys they so bitterly hated? You look at the way Sam Bennett and Evander Kane specifically played each other. Matthew Tkachuk, obviously one of the meanest guys on the ice too. You got to be heads up when all those guys are on the ice.
I think it has to be a short memory for the Edmonton Oilers for their time in Calgary. I don't think it matters that much now. This is a cup final. Bennett and Tkachuk, one could make the argument they aren't even the best players on this Panthers squad. So if Edmonton's going to hang on to something for these two players when they played back in Calgary, they're in for a rude awakening from the rest of that Panther squad.
191 days ago, the Edmonton Oilers were 31st in the NHL standings. And put that in perspective, tomorrow they will be playing for the Stanley Cup after winning the Western Conference. That is only the third team in the history of the NHL to be over 10 points out of a playoff and still make it. The first was back in 1957, the Toronto Maple Leafs. They did not win. The St. Louis Blues, the only other team that has been 10 plus points outside of a playoff position, and that's at any point in the season. And the Oilers, after firing Jay Woodcroft, bringing in Chris Knobloch, make up some aggressive switches, get into the postseason, then some more big changes that Knobloch made, and the way he has coached has been unbelievable throughout this postseason. And George, you look at that hire specifically, what has brought the difference? And obviously you knew it was going to improve from how horrible it was, but there was a lot of concerns in Edmonton that this might be a year where it was cup or bust, and it could have been bust so far that they didn't even make the playoffs.
Well, as a Rangers fan, let me start there. First and foremost, I was devastated that GM Chris Drury was very gun shy about promoting Chris Knobloch up from the Hartford Wolfpack, the AHL affiliate, thanks to David Quinn, right? Once that disaster of David Quinn happened coming over from Boston University, they're like, we don't really want to deal with any first-time head coaches here in this organization. We're going to move on. We're going to go to Gerard Gallant. Big mistake. Anyway, let's stop that there. But Knobloch did this kind of work down at Hartford. Okay. He was able to develop big time players. Braden Schneider, who saw big minutes in the playoffs for the Rangers, actually flourished under Knobloch. Knobloch took him under his wing, flourished under Knobloch, got called up to the big leagues and stayed up in the big leagues. Okay. When Knobloch was overlooked by the Rangers, he doubled down and he forced his agent to come up with a new contract that said, if there's an NHL opening and I'm offered, I'm allowed to leave Hartford whatever time of the year it is and jump to that opportunity. And look what he's doing now. As you mentioned, Casey, he took a team that nobody thought was going to do anything after the start of the season, and they're playing in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final tomorrow.
Stuart Skinner, a huge piece of that. He's been working with a mental coach, they've said, and after a very difficult series with Vancouver there, comes back against Dallas, and he was outstanding. He was a key piece. He won a couple of games. Obviously, it only went 6, so the offense helped him out as well. But there were a few tight ones that definitely some key saves turned against the Dallas Stars and really cut all momentum. So now you look forward, and the way the Panthers play, the goaltending has been a huge part of their success. Looking back to last year's run as well, Sergei Bobrovsky, one of the best to do it, and there's a reason he's currently the highest paid goaltender right now. So with Skinner retaking the helm here, trying to lead the Oilers to this cup, and when we look at the big question, one of the major questions going into this cup, can Stuart Skinner out-battle Bobrovsky and maintain the form that we saw against Dallas? Colin, you say no.
Yeah, Casey, there's a couple of ways to approach this one. And the first thing, and you guys mentioned it with Chris Knobloch, the wherewithal to hook Skinner during that Vancouver series. And since he got hooked, he's been amazing. A sub 2 goals against average, the save percentage up at 919. But I think you look at who the Panthers have already beaten so far in these playoffs. The 3 best goaltenders, you could say statistically, in the playoffs, that being Swayman, Shesterkin, and Vasilevsky, who wasn't great, but Swayman and Shesterkin were the 2 best goalies in these playoffs. So the way that the Panthers play, it's conducive to beating tight goaltending. And I'm not saying Skinner is a bad goalie by any means, because to your point, Casey, he did steal those games for the Stars. So this conversation has shifted from, can Stuart Skinner be a guy that can be successful, to, can the Panthers just batter him down until he finally relents and gives up a goal? And I think that's going to happen. And I also think if it's a battle between who's going to make that clutch save in that clutch moment, Skinner might make that save, but I think Bobrovsky has the greater chance of doing so. You saw what he did against one of the best offenses in the New York Rangers and the best special teams, like we've been talking about, for the Panthers limiting special teams play. So I don't think Skinner is the liability that he's been in years past. has since last year, but he's still not the Bobrovsky of the situation. He's still not the guy that I would trust to make a huge save with a minute to go or to make a huge save when the other team has the extra attacker out there. I just think Bobrovsky is that guy. So when we're talking about out-dueling, the guy with the biggest body of work is who I would, sign my name to in this situation. That being Bobrovsky, not to take anything away from Skinner because he's been doing it at a high level in these playoffs. I just think Bobrovsky's going to have the edge in this one. And the Florida style of play is also really, really conducive to battering down and wearing down a goaltender over time. And George, you made that great point earlier, is that if the Oilers want to win, they got to do it quick. The Panthers, as this series goes on, if it goes to 6 or 7, they're going to make life so difficult for Stuart Skinner. And that could be the thing that takes them over the top.
On the counter, I'll throw to that. Does it really matter if he can outbattle Bobrovsky? Does he even need to with the way the Oilers offense can punch?
I think that's an interesting question. I would say it does matter a little bit because the way that the Panthers defense has been limiting these top offenses, you look no further than the New York Rangers and what Barkov has been able to do to stars. And I'm not comparing McDavid to Panarin or to Kucherov or to Pastrnak, but there is a blueprint there. And obviously Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, they're cheat codes in the sport. But the way that the Panthers defend, especially 5-on-5 play, there is a way to beat these guys, and that is stick those top lines on top lines and get Barkov as much face time with Connor McDavid as possible, and then feast on the bottom 6 of the Oilers, right? That's what I think the Panthers are going to try and do, and Barkov's going to get his. Matty Tkachuk is going to get his. Bennett, anytime someone skates within 3 feet of him, is going to be throwing hands all over creation. So look, I think obviously there is the McDavid effect. There is that monkey wrench thrown into things. But I think the Panthers are going to do a good enough job of slowing down this Oilers offense. You're not going to stop them entirely. McDavid's going to get his. Draisaitl's going to get his. Hyman's going to get his. But what they can do is just make it a lot harder for them to do so. And then the Panthers on the other side, bursting in transition, will be able to operate pretty effectively as well. And I think as this series goes on, as it so often does in the playoffs, it's going to come down to goaltending one way or another. And when that does happen, I take Bobrovsky.
Another storyline to keep an eye on, Corey Perry in the Stanley Cup trying to find his second ring. And this is the 5th team that he has reached the Stanley Cup Finals with. So snaps out to him after a very tough year there that started with the elimination of his contract from the Blackhawks, finding some success in Edmonton. The first cup he won was his rookie year with Anaheim. That was 17 years ago. He's lost 3 straight. So Edmonton not only trying to end the drought of cups to Canada, but also for Corey Perry. Over to the conference finals now, and we'll start on the east side, New York and Florida. And we talked about Stuart Skinner there, Jenna. Sergei Bobrovsky showed that he's still in prime form after some question marks and against arguably the hottest goaltender in many years in Igor Shesterkin, who put on an outstanding performance. Bobrovsky was good enough to get the Panthers through to the next round.
Yeah, I think it's a tough topic since everybody complains that the Panthers are paying him $10 million a year. But I think that he made some really key saves when they were needed. Some great 2-on-1 saves and breakaway saves where the Panthers were caught in trouble. Definitely his speed and athleticism really showed, and he was rarely out of position. Sometimes he has been known to get caught out of position. But personally, I didn't see that at all. We have seen incredible performances from both Shesterkin, who has been the backbone for the Rangers, but their top lines failed to produce, and that's where Bobrovsky has soared, as he's been able to be the backbone of the Panthers, while the Panthers' top lines are also producing as well as their depth. And in the 4 first games of the series, which I thought it was funny, that Bobrovsky had more points, which was 1, than both Zibanejad and Kreider.
And George, you were also impressed by him. Unfortunately, it came on the heels of your own team.
Yeah, I didn't think it was possible, and shame on me because he is an elite goalie, but he elevated his game at the best time, right? As Jenna so eloquently just put it, through 4 games, he had 1 point more than Zibanejad and Kreider. But I think it's a testament to, and let's not forget, folks, okay, let's not forget, just 2 years ago, some Panthers fans were clamoring for Spencer Knight over Sergei Bobrovsky to take over the full-time position. And I'm thinking to myself, are these people nuts? And Bobrovsky was like, oh, maybe I could turn it into a high gear. And all of a sudden he's in back-to-back Cup finals.
Another Panther that played a huge part in the Florida Panthers advancement there against the New York Rangers and the President's Trophy winner, Gus Forsling, a +12 in the playoffs, and also 4 goals from the defenseman throughout the playoffs to this point. Jenna, another Panther that has gone above and beyond there, exceeding the expectation to get the Panthers to this point.
Yeah, drafted in the 5th round by the Canucks, picked up on waivers by the Panthers, and nobody thought he would be this much of an asset to the team. It kind of seems like a repeating factor for the Florida Panthers as they have stars basically come out of nothing. He had an outburst of offensive production in this past round against the Rangers. Like Casey said, a +12 and 4 goals from a defenseman. He definitely had some key assists, and his outburst of offensive production has definitely been an eye-opener in this series against the Rangers.
+57 in the regular season. Let's not forget that from him. Drafted in the 5th round, Jenna, you just said that Vancouver didn't want him. Chicago didn't want him. Carolina didn't want him. And it was Dale Talon back in 2021 who started to put together a good playoff team as a general manager for the Florida Panthers, then kind of stepped away, came back in on an interim basis before Bill Zito stepped in for the Panthers, who picked him up. He's only 27 years old, but at 27, he's only played 397 games. So there's not a lot of mileage on him. He's got his IQ. I'm telling you, just watching him and rewatching some of those games against the Rangers, he's fast. His hockey IQ is through the arena. And, you know, I envy his vision. And, oh, yeah, by the way, he did me a favor by eliminating the Bruins, that goal late in the 3rd period.
The shots on goal was another huge factor in this series. And other than game 2, New York outshot in every single game through the 6-game series against the Panthers. And for Igor Shesterkin, that's going to result in quite the paycheck coming for him. But for the Florida Panthers, obviously that has to be something that continues with the way Edmonton's offense rolls. Is that something that can continue as we look forward to the Stanley Cup Final with the Panthers outshooting the opposition?
I think yes. I mean, the Panthers are not afraid to shoot the puck. Although there are some times where I think that they're getting too cute with the puck almost and are trying to make the most perfect plays when they just need to throw it on net. But if they want to get ahead against Edmonton, I think they need to throw everything that they can get on Skinner and take advantage of his weaknesses.
I think if Florida can play in their system, I don't see this trend ending anytime soon. Knobloch does have a deeper roster. You take a look at the 4th line for Edmonton. It doesn't have Matt Rempe, who only played 4 minutes a night on it, you know, so it's a better 4th line overall. To Colin's point a little earlier, top 2 lines are going to be facing off against each other. This may be a bottom 6 line matchup in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think Edmonton has a slight advantage in that 4th line specifically. We already talked about Corey Perry. He's a part of that 4th line. So that may change it a little. But if we're talking overall, if the Panthers are entrenched, that trend's going to continue.
For the Rangers, it wasn't anything new getting outshot. They were outshot in every single game against the Carolina Hurricanes. They were outshot in 13 of the 16 total games. That is just 2 games out of the 4 that the Washington Capitals, essentially AHL roster that made the postseason, was outshot by New York there. So for Igor Shesterkin, an unbelievable workload that he had to face, and a guy with an impending contract negotiation coming up. He's a 2025 UFA, but obviously for the Rangers' sake, they want to get that done way before that. For you, George, could he become the highest paid goalie in the NHL?
Beep, beep, beep. beep. That's the sound of the Brinks truck that's going to back up into, back into Madison Square Garden, because James Dolan is going to empty the bank account. He's going to tell Chris Drury, I don't care the amount of money you have to pay him the amount of money and keep the rest of the team under the salary cap. It doesn't matter what it is. Because let's face it, he was the MVP for the Rangers of that Eastern Conference final. Nobody could say otherwise. Without him, that's a series sweep by the Panthers. Just think of it. Look back to Game 6. There was a save he made on Vladimir Tarasenko on a puck that went across the crease. He pushed across, made the save. Second go around, he couldn't do it. But guess what? Tarasenko went through 2 Rangers, including, yes, Braden Schneider, went through 2 Rangers to get to that back post for that tip-in goal. But before that, it was well within reach for the Rangers. That goal was the backbreaker. And then, of course, you had the other goal in the empty net.
An all-time quote in the media conference on the exit interviews when asked about speculation of what we just talked about there, telling the media in English, I don't speak English. But obviously something that we're going to keep an eye on. And Jenny, you and I were texting frequently throughout that series, both rooting against Georgia's team there. But what impressed you most about him? And obviously a terrifying face to have to go against, and my Carolina Hurricanes were the victims of it. Fortunately for you, the Panthers able to overcome Igor Shesterkin.
Yeah, I think definitely his quickness to get from post to post. Definitely the Panthers like to have cross the net plays, definitely out in front. And I saw a couple 2-on-1s that he dominated. I just think that his confidence right now is through the roof, or during the series it was, and that's always good for a player. I liked what I saw. I just think that the Rangers heavily relied on him almost too much. And that could have been their downfall.
Alexis Lafreniere, this seemed like his coming out party. The first overall pick for the New York Rangers. A lot of people have been disappointed with his play, and he's in his young 20s right now, so plenty of career in front of him. But 14 points out of the Rangers' 16 postseason games, 8 goals, 6 assists. It seemed like, especially in the Carolina series, he was alongside Vincent Trocheck in the back of the net every time his stick was on the puck. And not only the 14 points that he scored, but 11 of the points came during 5-on-5 play. He only had 3 power play points throughout the postseason. George, what an asset that can become here for the New York Rangers coming forward.
I'm going to throw my hands up in the air because I'm so excited. Finally, you mentioned it, Casey. Finally, the number 1 overall pick is playing like a number 1 overall pick. You mentioned his 3 power play points throughout the playoffs. I think looking back, Peter Laviolette would rather have him play PP1 rather than Adam Fox on one leg, and that may have got him a little more points on the power play during the playoffs. This is a Lafreniere that Rangers fans got glimpses of his rookie season in the preseason and bits and pieces during the season as well. The problem was Gerard Gallant being stuck in the 1980s and 90s of hockey didn't allow this young man to flourish. Well, guess what? Laviolette comes in and he says, you know what? I'm not going to bounce you around. We got Panarin, we got Trocheck. We need an RW2 here. Can you play RW? He said, yeah, let's do it. And he just let him loose. And that's why that second line is really the top line for the Rangers this whole season. And a lot of it has to do with Alexis Lafreniere. You look at the forecheck of that second line, Trocheck and Lafreniere, they're the 2 and 3 hit leaders on this Rangers team because they're so aggressive, and that allows Breadman to kind of open up offensively. Now, we all know he kind of disappears in the playoffs, does Breadman, but we're talking about Alexis Lafreniere. We're excited. As a Rangers fan, I'm super excited. The rest of the league should watch out because this was his coming out party.
And Game 3, definitely the highlight of his postseason, and an unbelievable goal that he scored to put away Florida there. Another guy that had a big outpouring this postseason, Vincent Trocheck, and a guy who had a really good all-around season looking back to the regular season as well. A guy who's now 2 years into a 7-year, $5.62 million deal, which is probably well under the value that he deserves. And going back to his time in Carolina didn't want to pay him when he was a free agent after 2021-22. He then made them pay this playoffs with 8 points in the 6-game series, 3 goals, 5 assists. He finished the postseason with 20 points, 8 goals, and 12 assists. Is this potentially the greatest UFA steal in recent history for the New York Rangers, having him now 7 years on just $5.5 million?
I mean, yeah, I think it was a great pickup by the Rangers, and he was a former Panther. I didn't see much from him in the Panthers. He had a couple great seasons, but after that, I kind of just fizzled out. So definitely a great addition by the Rangers. He's been producing. He definitely produced more than the top line. Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin didn't really do much in this series. So definitely a backbone of the Rangers there, other than Shesterkin. And we saw Emily Kaplan, I think it was, tell us that Trocheck chose number 16 because of how much he admires Alexander Barkov, which I thought was a great story. But him and Lafreniere have definitely dominated this series. Unfortunately, the result was not in their favor.
This man, see my heart right here? That's the heart that was stolen by Vinny Trocheck, not just me, but of the entire Blue Shirt Nation. As you mentioned, Jenna, a great story by Emily Kaplan, Vincent Trocheck just singing the praises of Sasha Barkov when he was with the Florida organization. And when he moved on to Carolina, he said, what number should I pick? Oh yeah, Barkov. I like him. He's a good mentor. And for your Canes to let him walk, Casey, you talk about a steal, STEAL. Give him to me, please. Now, if they could only strip Trouba of the sea and give it to the man who deserves it in Trocheck, because he's been the leader of this team since he stepped into that locker room 2 years ago, and he proved it this year on the ice with the points he's put up and in the locker room. That famous image of him and that famous video of him bringing in Shesterkin nice and tight, talking to him to his ear after the tough loss in Game 6 against Florida. Man, that's my captain. I don't care what anybody says in the room. That's my captain.
The Eastern Conference really proves my next question seemingly wrong here, with Sergei Bobrovsky, the highest paid goaltender in the NHL. He's on a 10-year, $10 million, and Shesterkin primed to likely beat that. He's currently on a 4-year, $5.6 million, which is the 10th highest in the NHL. But one thing that really irks me is teams that overpay goaltenders, and one that really stands out, Jack Campbell in Edmonton. Somehow Edmonton's been able to get there with Stu Skinner, but imagine if they had the extra cap without having Campbell, who's basically dead weight, spent the entirety of the year in the AHL. On the Western Conference side, you have Dallas with Ottinger. He's the 25th highest paid at $4.8 million. And Skinner, the 41st highest paid, just $2.6 million AAV for him. And looking at the top 10 in the NHL, Carey Price right now, the top paid goaltender at $10.5 million. Montreal is paying him $10.5. He didn't play a game this season. Bobrovsky is number 2. Again, $10 million. Andrei Vasilevsky, 9.5. They got knocked out in the first round. John Gibson, number 4. At $6.4 million, the Ducks finished 30th in the NHL. Toronto pays Matt Murray, the 5th highest, $6.25. He had just 26 games played, did not appear in the postseason. Toronto out in the first round. Connor Hellebuck is the 6th highest, $6.16 million AAV. Another team, first round exit. Jacob Markstrom for Calgary, $6 million, 7th highest paid. Calgary 24th in the NHL. St. Louis with Jordan Binnington, $6 million AAV. They were 16th in the NHL, did not make the postseason. And finally, Philip Grubauer, 9th out of the top 10 at $5.9 million. Seattle, 25th in the NHL. Igor Shesterkin there at 10 and likely to rise. So out of the top 30 goaltenders in the NHL, 3 of the top 30 highest paid goaltenders, that's Bobrovsky, Shesterkin, and Ottinger, led their team past the first round of the playoffs. Not even to the conference final. All 3 of them obviously were in the conference final, but 3 of the top 30 made it past the first round of the playoffs. And that poses my question. Are goaltenders worth the high contracts is one. And then also, with Igor impending, and George, you said you're happy as a Rangers fan to give him whatever bag he wants, but does that cause looming problems for the New York Rangers having to pay that out? That's cap that you have young guys, Lafreniere, a lot of young talent on that team, Kakko, who's probably on his way out, but guys that you're not going to be able to pay if you have to pay that high contract.
You get some money that's coming off the books if you're the Rangers. Blake Wheeler, sure, it's $800,000, but Jack Roslovic's $2 million, gone off the books. Alexander Wenberg's 2.25, gone off the books. You could also, and this is pie in the sky, I know, but you could also buy out Jacob Trouba, and there's $4 million that's going to go against you for the cap on that buyout. So you have a little money to move. Right now, there's still one more year left on that bridge contract for Alexis Lafreniere. I think he's in a good place right now, and I think Drury and the rest of the team has kind of talked him into being in that good place. So what you're looking at right now for the Rangers are really three future contracts: Ryan Lindgren, Kaapo Kakko, and Braden Schneider. Kakko, for me, while most of the fan base likes what he can do, I think it's more of a Jesper Fast situation on Broadway. Yes, Jesper Fast was drafted way later. Kakko's a number 2 overall pick, but I think they're willing to negotiate to trade the rights to talk to Kakko in order for a draft pick coming up, because they do need some draft capital coming up. Schneider, they could give a bridge deal just similar to the one that they gave Lafreniere, 2 for 1.5 or 2 for 2, and I think he'll be okay with that. Lindgren, some people were saying $6 million for Lindgren. I think that's too much. 4 by 5 for Lindgren, I think will fit in nicely. The biggest thing is the Shesterkin talk. Shesterkin is rumored to be looking for 12.5. Okay, that's a lot of money for a team to put up. And when you have contracts like an $8 million for Trouba and $11 million for Panarin, it's difficult to kind of rework those things unless some of these other players are going to rework their contracts. We'll see what the number winds up being for Shesterkin, but there are contracts that they could easily get rid of right now.
I'll send it your way here. Is it worth the high contract and the price they're going to have to pay?
Yeah, Casey, I think it is. I mean, we've talked about Igor before as one of the best goalies in the NHL, and in these playoffs. I mean, the goals saved above expected numbers speak for themselves. I think, George, you raised the point of the 12.5, and in this era of the salary cap that always is under consideration. And Casey, you mentioned those top names, but when you look at where Shesterkin is in his career, he's not at that Carey Price level where he's not going to play, because of whatever injury lingering concerns are there. John Gibson, a very similar situation. I don't think he's even remotely comparable to Jack Campbell either. So look, when you're looking also, I mean, George, you can probably speak to this too about the pipeline that's coming in at the goaltending position for the Rangers. It's not a Stuart Skinner situation where someone's just going to jump in and be a playoff caliber goaltender. Igor is that guy. He is New York's guy, I think. And just imagine if he goes to another team, if it's even within the Eastern Conference, what that would do to this Rangers fan base. So I think you give the guy the money that he wants. As a Capitals fan, I would love it if he shipped out west somewhere. Do not think that's going to happen. I think he's going to stay home in New York and haunt my dreams for a few more years to come. But I think when you look at the body of work that he's had and what he brings, it would be irresponsible from a GM perspective to say goodbye, let go somewhere else. We're going to save money, especially because this core of the Rangers is still primed to win now. It's not an aging core, right? You're still going to hold on to Panarin. Zibanejad is a little bit iffy, but I think from everything I've seen about the Rangers, he's going to stay put. So the core is there, and Shesterkin is a part of that core. It would make no sense to get rid of him.
The Rangers are out. The Florida Panthers advance. 6 games was the difference there. And the same scenario in the West. 6 games as Edmonton tops Dallas. And looking at the offensive power of Edmonton that we talked about early, for a time here, there was a lot of doubt with McDavid and Draisaitl, and a lack of production. Still some to get out of Draisaitl, and they're certainly going to need him to be successful here in the Cup final. But a lot of speculation around potentially whether or not McDavid and Draisaitl are battling injuries. I think McDavid certainly proved that's not the case in the later games of that series. But for the Oilers, depth has to be a major factor, and you can't rely on those guys to go out and play 30 minutes. We saw that last year. It's something they've really worked on adding into this season, and it's been a reason that they've gotten to the point they are. But now here in the Stanley Cup Finals, the Panthers able to roll 3, maybe 4 lines of Class A forwards that are going to bring everything they've got. So outside of those big name guys that Edmonton has offensively, what is the importance of finding more outside of those star players?
Yeah, definitely. In the playoffs, not just the top 2 lines have to produce, just like not two of the top players have to produce, like McDavid and Draisaitl. All lines have to contribute. And you don't want to tire your top 2 lines out or top line out. You don't want to bang them up because they may already, just like you said, be and when depth lines get their rare shift, maybe in the third, they're out there to produce something or to produce something for the top line to go off of. And if star players aren't producing, that's what the depth is brought in for. And definitely teams have to capitalize on having their third or fourth line out there. They need to give their top players a rest.
I think to that point, Jenna, Dylan Holloway, he's already got 3 goals this postseason. He's halfway to his regular season total of 6, and Matthias Ekholm has been proficient with 4 goals, 3 assists for 7 points in the playoffs. To your point, Jenna, that's absolutely right. The bottom 6 lines have to do something, have to produce. They have some players who have already put the puck in the back of the net. Can they continue to do that against this robust Panther lineup? That's the biggest question.
Ekholm has definitely been an outstanding addition to that team over the last couple of seasons. Evan Bouchard, also a guy really breaking into his own. But the story defensively has been around Darnell Nurse, a -13 in the postseason. And obviously the Canadian market really vamps up the importance of high contract guys performing. But he's on an 8-year, $9.25 million contract. And with that -13 number, the one big day was where he came out and he really answered the call, honestly, with the media going after him. He pulled a Marshawn Lynch, not talking to the media, 1-word answers, taking 3 questions and walking away. But Jenna, you work in media, and looking at the way that he's been treated and really brutalized throughout the playoffs here, considering the negativities of some of his play, but also the contract hit, does he deserve that media scrutiny?
Yeah, I've definitely read some nasty comments about Nurse, and it kind of hurts me myself. Just being in media, just you wouldn't want to see that about yourself online. But like you said, his plus minus has not been great at all. He hasn't been producing pretty much anything at all. I think I only read that he produced 1 point in the playoffs so far. And with him in making $9.25 million on average per season, he should be producing more than that in the playoffs. But also, if you think about it, having the media on your back like that is not going to help you. It's only going to make it worse and difficult to perform. So I'm on both sides, kind of. I see why the media is scrutinizing him so much, but I also feel that mercy needs to be given at some point, and we need to kind of lay off the negativity because it's not helping a person in any way. He definitely already knows it, that he's not performing well at all. So I don't think that we need to linger on that fact.
There's your stick tax to Connor McDavid. Unbelievable goal in Game 6 that really shut down Dallas's chances of advancing there. And Colin, the space given was minimal. The skill level shown was unbelievable, and above that, if that's even possible.
Yeah, Casey, this is something I could barely even do on NHL 24 with a controller. Like, look, this is why this Stanley Cup Final is going to be so exciting. This goal in particular, this is the first time the national media, the national sports fans at large will see the greatest NHL player of the past 8 years do exactly what he's been doing his entire career. This thing was masterful, and this is the game-breaking tendency of a player like McDavid. We have never seen a player like him in any type of huge Stanley Cup game before, because there's never been a player like him in any huge Stanley Cup game before. That's what the Panthers are going to have to deal with. If they put 5 defenders on him, there's still a non-zero chance he dices through all of those players and scores. Like, it's impossible to defend. This goal was just incredible. Leon Draisaitl after the game said, there's not much to say about it. That's all he said. He said, I'm not impressed. I'm not depressed anymore, because it's what he does all the time. Like, that's what makes Connor McDavid so special. And I think we're talking about the stats of this Stanley Cup. We're breaking it down with the metrics, but this is going to be so much fun because of what McDavid brings. When there's 5 skaters in the D zone, he's going to say, hey, I can zigzag through them. Let me just do it real quick. And that's going to be real cool. And this goal was just exceptional. You watch the highlight tapes of McDavid throughout his career. It's not something new, but still, when we see it on that Stanley Cup ice against the Panthers, it's going to be pretty special.
And
I could attest.
It's tough.
Sorry, Casey, really quick. I could attest to McDavid going through 5 players.
Yep.
Up and down the ice and then scoring on an elite goaltender in Igor Shesterkin. I saw it happen. It happened to the Rangers. He took it from the defensive end, went through 5 players and scored. So your point, Colin, of him going through 5 players is absolutely possible. I heard someone equate to his moves operating in a phone booth. How do you move your hockey stick like that in that tight of a space? I don't know. It was amazing.
A lot of storylines on either way that series could have gone, and stories to root for. And pretty much 3 of the 4 teams, unless it was the New York Rangers, 90% of the of North America was going to be happy. And for George, you're the veteran on the podcast here. Unfortunately for Dallas, it sounds like it's going to be the end for one of their big vets, Joe Pavelski, saying this was likely his last go. He ranks all-time most playoff games played without a Stanley Cup in NHL history, 198 going into this season, and added to that 3rd most in games played in the NHL. That was 1324 before the start of the NHL playoffs. Also on the team, Ryan Suter, most active games played without a cup. He has the 7th most games played all time at 1436, the 18th most playoff games at 130. Jamie Benn right up there with both of those guys as well. Looking at, and this could be without Pavelski, but for the remaining guys here, how many chances do these Dallas Stars guys and the vets have left?
I think, honestly, you're probably looking at within 2 years, there's still a good chance Dallas comes back to at least the conference final, maybe even the cup final. Okay, because you're looking at Wyatt Johnson on his entry-level contract. You're looking at Jake Ottinger, who's still signed through those 2 years as well. Okay, the entry-level contract for Wyatt Johnson expires in 26-27. Ottinger's coming up shortly after that, and he's going to demand more money than the $4 million he's getting paid now. So you're looking at that window right there. Within the next 2 years, they're still going to be a great team. They still have Pete DeBoer behind the bench, who's a fantastic coach, who's really coached these guys up and has really brought this whole team together, and the city of Dallas right behind them to get to where they are now. I just see them kind of refocusing for next year. I feel bad, for Joe Pavelski. He was kind of stuck on in a San Jose organization that really couldn't do anything, and then just couldn't really get anywhere after that. And then he found a good home in Dallas, and they do this incredible run, and then run into Connor McDavid in Edmonton in that series, and couldn't come away with a cup for him.
For Pavelski, if this is it for him, an unbelievable career, and the leadership that he shows is through the roof. Next to the best of any of them, and it shows with Wyatt Johnston living in his basement right now. Colin, it would be a real bummer to see him go, and hopefully this wasn't it, but it likely sounds like his retirement coming up.
Yeah, Pavelski himself saying that he doesn't really expect to play. And this is something that's interesting. Pavelski actually grew up a few miles down the road from where I am this summer in Wisconsin Rapids. He grew up in Plover, a couple of minutes down the road. But look, you talked about it, Casey, and George, you mentioned it too. This is a heart and soul type guy that's somehow, some way been that way for his entire career. And that's been a really long time throughout his time with the Sharks and now the Stars. And I was looking at the reporting after this Stars loss and what Wyatt Johnston himself was saying, what Pavelski himself was saying. And it's just a kind of a heartbreaking situation that he did all of this. He achieved all of this. To me, he's a surefire Hall of Famer. and he just doesn't get that Stanley Cup ring. It's like Dan Marino, right? Like just that kind of body of work, maybe not the records that are being set by a guy like Marino, but with Pavelski, what he meant to each franchise he was a part of. And remember, with Dallas, he was there for a while, six plus years, but the leadership he showed there, just it reverberated throughout every single team he was on. You hoped that they would be able to get the job done this year, one of the deeper teams and the more well-rounded teams in the NHL. And like you said, it just ran into the buzzsaw that was McDavid and the Oilers, and that happens in pro sports all the time. So it was a heartbreaking end, but that cannot be the story of his career. Like, obviously, the media is going to say Pavelski, one of the guys that just didn't win a cup, but I think the story of his career should be the captain or one of the leaders of these teams that always, every single season contributed. And, he didn't get the job done, but that's not the story of his career. The story is that he was one of the best players at every single season that he was a part of.
Pretty big list of important UFAs coming up for the Dallas Stars. We'll cover that in our free agency episode. But two big ones on the blue line, Yanni Hakanpää and Thomas Harley, who both quarterback the power play on both units there. Dallas's power play, really the dagger for them in this series. And going back to the series before, 7 straight games for Dallas to finish the postseason without a power play goal, Jenna.
Yeah, special teams definitely a big factor in any playoff game. We didn't see much from Dallas in the special teams area. Definitely the Oilers have obviously a great power play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on their first power play unit. All I have to say really about that is special teams wins games. And that you definitely need to crack down on as a coach too, Pete DeBoer. So I just think that's where they lost the game, really. Otherwise, I would see kind of less of an even goaltending match, but more of an even 5-on-5 play. Obviously, not in the special teams area. So I just definitely think that that's something that Dallas can brush up on, and that's definitely where the Oilers have soared. And we'll see that even coming to in the Stanley Cup Final.
Obviously, we were able to see Edmonton inject life into that arena thanks to their power play. So something for Dallas that they'll have to keep minds on going into free agency this upcoming year. We'll end the conference final recap on a positive note here. And another player that really impressed here, Wyatt Johnston, a guy who was rookie eligible here this season. And again, another young guy that really blew up here in this postseason. 11 points through the first 2 rounds, 7 goals and 4 assists as the Dallas Stars advanced into the conference final here. And another guy really impressive, also tagged to Joe Pavelski, and hopefully he can learn some of the things that Pavelski did as a leader to take over himself, as he could be a key piece of the Dallas Stars for a long time to come here.
They're hoping he's not just a flash in the pan, right? Because if not, what a coming out party for Wyatt Johnston. You talked about the fantastic regular season and in the playoffs. I think what fit him nicely is Pete DeBoer had him as a C3, and not forcing him into a C2 or C1 where he has to think, I have to produce here. It's my responsibility to get ourselves going and produce. Putting Johnston 3C or C3, whichever way you want to call it, I think that helped ease him into everything and loosened him up and just got him cranking. Of course, it helps when you have Jamie Benn on your left wing, right? Like just kind of talking you through some things and maybe sitting on the bench, grabbing the iPad and say, hey, see this here? If this were to happen again, let's approach it this way. And he's a fast learner. He's picking everything up very quickly. He's going to be a very big star here in the league.
And finally snaps out to Pete DeBoer with the first round Game 7 win over Vegas. He now moves 8-0 all time in Game 7. So for those who are going to be following our betting segment, that's one to keep a ear out for. That's going to have to be a year down the line, but a very impressive accomplishment, and a guy behind the bench who unfortunately didn't get the opportunity against Edmonton, but that would have been a major plot line for Pete DeBoer going up against Connor McDavid in one spot in the Stanley Cup.
He's been impressive behind the bench. I love his approach. His system is clearly something that is adaptable to both younger and older players, and he meshes well with that room. Dallas has bought in 100% with Pete DeBoer. And again, his team just ran into Connor McDavid, and it was McDavid himself who wanted that Game 6 more than anybody else on this planet. And that was the difference in Game 6 for Edmonton, right? I get a chance to kind of call his son's games over at Holy Cross, Matt DeBoer. This young man, his hockey IQ is through the roof, and how can it not be? You got your dad breaking down film. You're probably sneaking in, watching your dad talking to himself about film and seeing all these kinds of things. But if that's the kind of stuff that Pete DeBoer is thinking about and talking about at his own home with his son when he's trying to break down film and just kind of giving him some advice, I can only imagine higher level stuff that's going on in the room. That's why Dallas has been consistent in being toward the top teams. And again, I expect them to be at least conference finals next year.
We're going to start a new segment here, impressed or depressed, and this the playoff edition. So we'll go with playoff teams. And we'll start in the East. George, with your team here, for the four of us on the pod right now, Colin and I were impressed by the performance of the President's Trophy New York Rangers. George and Jenna have them depressed. They are the President's Cup Trophy winners from the regular season with 114 points. Out of that, the top seed in the East and the NHL, unfortunately eliminated in the Eastern Conference Final, the second time in 3 years that they have lost in that round, and it was to the Panthers in 6 games. They add Peter Laviolette as the head coach, brings them to the conference final, but George, you're not impressed.
No, I am depressed. Another year of getting my heart ripped out by this team. I know not everyone is 100% come playoff time, but one could argue that, a member of Colin's team in Washington issued a nice dirty knee-on-knee hit, which aggravated a knee injury for Adam Fox. That's all I'm going to say about that.
I mean, there's something about glass houses and throwing stones.
Yes, no, you're right.
When you're wearing that Rangers jersey.
I will get
also
to
a knee
that,
injury that began against Carolina too. So all three of us.
Yes. Yes. I'll get to Trouba, don't you worry. But the knee injury for Adam Fox that just kind of held him off to one leg. I think the biggest disappointment for me was, other than Trouba being a liability on the blue line, and again, I never liked the signing to begin with. $8 million for him was egregious, and when he was given the C, I almost lost my mind, as did many in Blue Shirt Nation. But I think the biggest thing over and over again, for me anyways, is Kreider, Zibanejad, and Panarin disappearing once the calendar turns to April. Yes, Kreider had that one game against your Canes, Casey, where he played out of his gourd and had a natural hat trick in the third period because he said, you know what? I'm just going to lead us to the Eastern Conference Final. Okay, well, where's that gameplay every other game in the playoffs? You got to be consistent. And for him to be able to turn it on and not care one moment to the next, Zibanejad's been streaky. Colin, you already talked about his stay in New York so far, $8.5 million. I'm not expecting for you to be a 200-point getter every year, but you can't go from 97 points to 67 points to 100 points to 70 points. You got to be a little more consistent, and that's why I'm depressed.
I got the opposite take there, and obviously it's tough to lose anywhere, but a team with a brand new head coach and looking to the future with the way some of these guys played. Igor Shesterkin, I don't think anybody in the world can be upset with the way he played. You also think about the guys we talked about there in Lafreniere and Trocheck in their explosions throughout that playoffs. For me, that's one of the big things that I think for the Rangers, the takeaway would be that the future is still coming here. Even though obviously you didn't win the Stanley Cup, but unfortunately only one team gets that honors. Next up is the Carolina Hurricanes here, second in the Metro this season, and all year just could not catch up to the Rangers. Every time it looked like there was a chance, the Rangers went on an 8-game heater. Third in the NHL, 111 points, a second-round exit to the Rangers in 6 games. And everybody except for me has them listed as impressed. I was depressed, and not for the same reason as George, just because his team lost. But again, with the mind of the future, and for the Carolina Hurricanes, this was the year. They don't have a history of going all in and taking UFAs and trading away. This was the year, though. They make the move for Jake Gensel and in a big trade to try to get him. Upcoming this year, 10 UFAs, 10 RFAs, and a lot of that's going to come out of the defense. It looks like Shea and Pesci potentially, or at least one of the two, are going to have to be gone. And coming into this year, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions, the best defensive core by a mile in the NHL. And unfortunately, you lose Pesci in the first round. But the offense couldn't quite get it done. I thought they underperformed in quite a few, and honestly, in the Islanders series, to be able to come out in 5 games was impressive. And the Islanders just an underwhelming team there, and Carolina had a little bit more firepower, but I didn't think they played great. And losing to the Rangers, I think, could be expected. That's the President's Trophy winner. You can't be too upset with that. But for me, the big reason is looking forward to the future. This was the one year they went all in and put all the chips on the tables, and unfortunately the dice didn't roll their way. Snake eyes, they're out, and now a huge offseason upcoming. But again, you guys, a little bit different take on that with the impress side.
I feel that there may be a 1A goaltender away from a solid performance and to the point where you're getting to another Eastern Conference final, maybe even a Cup final. Rod Brind'Amour has done a fantastic job coming in and taking over the helm, and the system he's put in place, it's very similar to the system that Paul Maurice runs in Florida. Oh, by the way, Rod Brind'Amour was coached by Paul Maurice back with the Hartford Whalers and the Carolina Hurricanes. But you take a look at that, and if you want anybody in defense, how about you and I make a deal for Trouba? I keep $4 million. You take Trouba. You could have Trouba and Shea, a New York defenseman reunion, if you will. But, sure, you got a lot of contracts you got to figure out. But I think with Brind'Amour being retained almost immediately after the end of the season, it sends a good sign for the guys remaining in the room. And I think it sends a good sign for the players that maybe were on the fence about re-signing and maybe taking home-friendly deals to stay with the Hurricanes. Now that they know Brind'Amour's back, they may be willing to take less money to stay there and work things out and get back to glory.
And a major piece there with the extension of Rod Brind'Amour, 5 more years. And again, we'll cover all of the free agency drama upcoming in our free agency episode later on in June after the Stanley Cup is over. Next up, the Florida Panthers, by unanimous decision, impressed all around every single member of our team. The Atlantic Division champions, they will play for their 3rd Stanley Cup, their 2nd consecutive. They finished the season 1st in the Atlantic, 5th in the NHL, 110 points, and again, walk their way to the Stanley Cup Final. Jenna, hard not to be impressed with this team.
Yeah, definitely, Casey. Something I want to definitely point out is their difference in physicality of the game. So I'm definitely loving their level at the moment, and other teams are definitely finding it hard to match. And that's not typical for the Florida Panthers in the playoffs. In past years, they've had struggles with physicality, and they're usually trying to catch up to other teams' level of physicality. I'm loving their intensity, and Paul Maurice is definitely forcing that on his team, definitely to play intensely at all minutes of the game, no matter if you're down or if you're up. And definitely a couple key players like Forsling and Lundell actually has been showing up with a couple of key goals and game-winning goals. The top lines have definitely been producing again, and including the D-men like Forsling. The special teams are looking better than in other playoff runs. I'm really liking that. Goaltending has been good. Bobrovsky has been living up to his $10 million contract. And I feel like we don't look banged up in general. In past years, we have tons of injuries that players have been playing through. But I feel like that's in the past for now, but we'll see what happens in this coming series. And one key thing that I would like to know is they have to sign their best player currently, Sam Reinhart. So one question to pose definitely for the next episode is who goes? And many say that it's going to be Brandon Montour, that we're not going to be able to afford both two amazing players, Reinhart and Montour.
The Boston Bruins, second in the Atlantic, seventh in the NHL, 109 points, a second round exit in a loss to Florida in 6 games. Colin, you are one of 3 here, everybody except myself, that were depressed by the performance of the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, look, it comes down to this, Casey. When you have the best goaltender in the playoffs, you got to get the job done. And that's what Jeremy Swayman was in these Stanley Cup playoffs. Every single game he was out there, he was just magic. And look, you give up 1 or 2 goals in a game, you expect to win that hockey game. And when the Bruins did not do that against the Panthers for the 2nd straight year, that's where the depressed side of things lies. I see the other side of the coin. I go to a school in Boston. I spend the majority of my time in Boston. Not a lot of people in and around the city thought this Bruins team was going to be anything near anything this season, and they got there and they got to the playoffs. They beat the Maple Leafs again, but still, I mean, wasting away Swayman's performance in these playoffs is inexcusable. And after this year, Linus Ullmark is probably going to go somewhere else, and it's going to just be Swayman. And that's fine. That's fine if Swayman is the guy, but we don't know for sure if he can handle a full season just yet. So this season, if we're keeping tally marks, they wasted the best goaltending tandem in the NHL, and they wasted the best goaltender in the playoffs. And that's why it's not an impressive playoff run, because they just couldn't get it done with the most important player in between the pipes being what he was, and that was amazing. And they just couldn't finish the job for him.
I'm on the side of the fans in Boston there, and of course it's the Toronto Maple Leafs that they had to get past. So for the Bruins, not a hefty mountain to climb there. But looking back to the start of the year, this team was dead, and I'm one of many people that had them outside of my playoffs. I did not think anything of Boston. They go out and really made a run for the number 1 spot in the conference. But not only that, they advance through the first round of the playoffs. You lose Krejci, you lose Bergeron, and huge question marks there. Some guys step up, you find a couple of centers, and again, for the Bruins, now it's the future that looks bright here. They've got a good draft pool coming up from Providence. They've got some young guys still coming. So for me, the only one on the podcast, I was impressed by the Boston Bruins. Next up, my favorite team to see lose, especially in the playoffs, out of the Canadian market, it was the Toronto Maple Leafs, and by unanimous decision, a team that depressed every single person on the podcast. 3rd in the Atlantic, 10th in the NHL, 102 points, a first-round exit in the loss to Boston, 7 games. Heath fired. Can the core 4 stay together? All those question marks looming. And George, another disappointing finish for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the postseason.
As an original 6 fan, I really want this team to be good, but they just can't get out of their way, whether it's screw ups in the front office. I don't think Keefe was the problem. I think Nylander and Matthews were a lot more injured than they let on, especially Matthews playing early on in that series and then having to take a game or 2 off and then coming back. You know, again, nobody's 100% come playoffs time, but this is an organization that can't get out of their own way. Now Adam Keefe is gone because, yeah, he was the problem, even though they didn't have good goaltending throughout the playoffs. And we've already talked about, you know, Matt Murray cashing in money and not even appearing in the playoffs for them. So is that, you know, that's an organizational problem. And it's unfortunate that the guys in the locker room have to deal with that, but that's where we're at right now.
Split decision on the Tampa Bay Lightning. George and I were impressed by the Lightning. Jenna and Colin depressed. A wild card 1 spot, 13th in the NHL after a 98-point season. first round exit to the Florida Panthers in 5 games. Stamkos, the big question mark as the impending UFA, and wondering where the team goes from here. And Jenna, you were not impressed in the loss to the Florida Panthers out in the first round.
Yeah, I feel like there was definitely a lot of mistakes that were made by the Lightning. And I just feel like the physicality that they bring on wasn't really there. It seems like they're a pretty physical team on the normal, and they really have been in their cup runs as well. But I just really didn't see it here. And I feel like Vasilevsky was kind of off. He didn't seem like his usual playoff self. He's usually a lockdown brick wall, but a couple of the Panthers' shots have trickled by him in that series, and I just feel like Florida clearly outplayed them.
George, you were in the same camp as me, impressed by the Tampa Bay Lightning.
I was. I think, to Jenna's point about Andre Vasilevsky, excuse me, I think he's getting worn down. He's faced a lot. He's played a lot of hockey because Tampa has advanced deep into playoffs year after year after year. He's faced a lot of pucks, and I think he's just starting to break down. But by and large, I was impressed by that team, the way they were able to scrap their way, clinch the playoff berth, and then, of course, you go up against Florida, and we've already seen Florida eliminate 3 teams. They're not an easy team to get through. So I was pleasantly surprised with how they came out and played this year. Again, I don't know what needs to happen with Vasilevsky, but it looks like he's starting to break down. So unless Tampa has someone in the pipeline waiting to come in and be a not necessarily 1A, 1B like Olmark and Swayman over in Boston, but someone who could take a good chunk of the workload off in the regular season to help Vasilevsky kind of reset himself during the year, I don't think I think we've seen the door kind of close on Tampa for a while here.
And Vasilevsky, the reason I was impressed there as well, just the fact that they made it in. He had to miss so much of that season, and the fact that they were able to keep themselves in a playoff spot. And again, we'll have to see where they go here in free agency with Stamkos, the big question mark. Next is the New York Islanders. Again, I'm on an island by myself here, impressed with the Islanders. And for me, it was just making the playoffs. 3rd in the Metro, 15th in the NHL, 94 points this season, a first-round loss to the Carolina Hurricanes in 5 games, which obviously is a disappointing part. But another team that had to battle the coaching change. And you look at the way that the roster is built here, I think they need to make some big changes, because this felt like a year where it could have been all downhill, and they are able to squeak their way in. They rallied hard in that second half, able to get themselves into the postseason. But obviously, once they got there, a bit of an inferior team. But for me, that was the reason I was impressed there. And I think a lot of that core has to change there. They need to get some primary scoring. I think they have a good defensive base, a lot of physicality out of that team. But you look at the way, especially in the first half of the regular season, that they could not put multiple goals together, could not get 3 goals, could not get 4 goals that sometimes it takes. And you can't win games when you're only scoring 2 goals a game. Colin, you were depressed by their performance this year.
Man, I just wanted it to be a little bit closer in this playoff series. That's what it comes down to for me. The turnaround was great. Seeing the final stretch and them pushing their way into the playoffs was great. But man, you get to the playoffs, and I wanted them to have a little bit more jump and a little bit more fight down the stretch there. It didn't end up happening. They won that one game 4. It looked like they could have sealed it in game 5 and gone back home for 6. It just didn't happen. And that's, I mean, we're going to talk about the Washington Capitals in just a second here. And spoiler alert, I'll have the exact opposite take for that team. But I think, look, for the Islanders, I just wish they put up more of a fight and made this series a bit more compelling. But I do see your point. Like, it is cool that they made that turnaround. But overall, the series was over after the first 3 games, and it's like, okay, we're moving on to the next one. And the Canes had it kind of in the bag early.
Washington Capitals, wild card number 2, 17th in the NHL, a 91-point season, and dramatics in the finish to get them into the postseason. A first-round exit and a sweep by the New York Rangers. Obviously, a much better team there in the President's Trophy winner, and a team, in my opinion, that really didn't deserve to be in the postseason. Colin, you and I were both impressed.
Yeah, these are my guys, Casey. This team was really, really, really impressive for a few reasons. One, guess what? They sold at the trade deadline and still made the playoffs. No Anthony Mantha, no Yevgeny Kuznetsov, and Mantha, one of the top goal scorers at the time. They didn't have Nicholas Backstrom all season, who was slotted to be their 1C. Kuzi down at 2C. They made it to the playoffs without their top two centers in the mix. They made it to the playoffs with Alexander Ovechkin scoring 7 goals essentially in the first half. They made it to the playoffs with inferior goaltending in the first half of the season. Why? Because of Spencer Carberry, and that's why I'm so impressed, because this is my coach of my team for hopefully the next 10 plus years. I don't care how long, because what he was able to do with, you mentioned an AHL roster. I was shaking my head at the time, but that's pretty true. What Spencer Carberry was able to do with young guys like Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre and, Lucas Johansson and Alexander Alexiev on the defensive side. That is indicative of a coach that trusts his young guys to go up there and produce. And that is going to set the franchise forward a number of years, because Peter Laviolette just didn't do that when he was with Washington. He just didn't play the young guys that were the future of the team. So really impressed that even though they sold off at the trade deadline, they were dead in the water for a while. They come in with Carberry's leadership and they operate really, really effectively, and they make a playoff spot. And obviously, the draft pick's not going to be great, but I think even though it was a 4-game sweep, those 4 games of playoff experience for the aforementioned McMichael and Lapierre are going to be invaluable going forward, because now they have that experience under their belt for the next few seasons. The Caps are going to get Ryan Leonard in a couple of years. He's going to add another element of jump to the team. I think this team, because of this season, is primed to take some steps forward going forward. Maybe not next year, but in the next few years to get back to where they were in the 2010s era of the team.
Jenna's got plans to drop a steamer from the dog onto your shoe. She was depressed.
Yeah, my comments are plain and simple. A, no production from their star player Ovechkin. B, who can compare to Igor Shesterkin at this point if you're on the Capitals? And it was just too much of an uneven matchup to me. I mean, they didn't have the team to eliminate the Rangers like the Panthers did to Boston last year. There was no chance for an upset for me.
On to the West, and the team that entered the playoffs as the top team in the West, the number 1 seed and second overall in the NHL with 114, the Dallas Stars, unfortunately out to the Edmonton Oilers. Impressed was Colin. The rest of us depressed by the performance. And George, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it all goes back to the way this roster was put together, the way this team had played all season long. Otter was great in net all season long, and he was in the playoffs as well. It's just, you run into, and it sounds like a broken record, but you run into Edmonton and McDavid, who are just like, yeah, we're going to take this, and that's it. And that's how it ends. And that's what got me depressed. Most of everything else was fantastic. You got Johnston's coming out party, cap space to do work on some contracts, and DeBoer behind the bench. But, I was really rooting for them. I was rooting for a Dallas, New York Stanley Cup Final to see Otter and Shesty and goal facing off against each other to see what would have happened. So that's why I was depressed about the Stars.
Colin, you're on the other side.
And I think, George, you mentioned it. It is what Johnston brought in these playoffs that got me really excited for the future. And I think you were right in what you said earlier, that the window is it's shutting because of Pavelski retiring. It's probably a year to 3 years if they want to have a chance to finish the job with this team. And I think they do. And Johnston's only going to get better. I think Ottinger still has maybe a little bit of extra space to get better. And if not, he's still one of the better goaltenders in the NHL. And this team is so well-rounded still, even with some players set to depart. Jason Robertson, one of the best goal scorers in the league. So yeah, obviously you would have hoped with this aging core that they get over the hump and they seal the deal. They didn't do it, but I still think I'm excited for the future of this Stars team. And this is a team that's going to be really, really tough to beat even in the next few years. I think that's why I'm impressed, because you got a guy like Wyatt Johnston who's going to I think he's going to set the league on fire in the next few years if he didn't already do that. That's why I'm pretty excited about them. It would have been nice if they got it done, but I think there's still positivity around the Stars because of these young guys.
Continue to pit Colin and George against each other here in the Winnipeg Jets, a team, Colin, you were very high on going into the season and also the playoffs. Everybody except George depressed by their performance.
Yeah, Casey, I had this Jets team to beat the Avalanche. I had them going far to get knocked out, by the Oilers later on in the playoffs. And when I saw that first game against the Avalanche, I was like, here we go. Colin Kapoor is going to be right for this playoff prediction, blah, blah, blah. Then the rest of the series happened. And then we saw what really came to pass. And that was the Avalanche just enforcing their will over the Jets. I thought Connor Hellebuck was going to be the best goalie in the playoffs. I thought he was going to backstop them to a Cup final appearance or to a Western Conference final appearance, and it just didn't happen the way the Avalanche came across and slapped them across the face by not letting Hellebuck see any pucks. So I just really thought they would be able to seal the deal here, and it was really sad that they didn't. Obviously, it was a really exciting series because of some of the lack of goaltending on the other side with Georgiev. So that was cool. But when I saw the Jets just not be able to beat that just an amazing offense of the Avalanche, I was a little bit sad about it. And I don't know if they're going to have what it takes to get there again next year. I really don't. Maybe Hellebuck can regain that form that he had in the regular season and do it all over again. Maybe. I just don't know. I thought this was their year and it didn't come to pass.
Second in the Central, fourth in the NHL, 110 points. A first-round exit to Colorado in 5 games after winning Game 1, 4 straight losses. But George, you were impressed.
I was because I was impressed by their regular season, and I was especially impressed, like Colin said, about that first game. I started watching that first game and I'm like, oh boy, all right, Winnipeg, look at what they're doing to Colorado. This is fantastic. But if you take a look at the buildup of the roster, right, you still have plenty of guys under contract. Now, the biggest question is going to be is, like Colin mentioned, can Connor Hellebuck live up to that $8.5 million contract in the regular season next year to put him in a similar position? That's yet to be seen. But for what they did this year and the fact that they still have a lot of these players under contract for next year, that's what I was impressed about. Like, okay, you take away the final 4 games in a gentleman's sweep, right? In the game in the series against Colorado. But that's something like they're good. They have plenty of draft capital too coming up. So that's what I'm mostly impressed about. The fact that this core is going to be there still next year. Okay. And they could maybe surprise some teams next year.
A unanimous decision. The team is impressed with the Vancouver Canucks. First in the Pacific, 6th in the NHL, 109 points, a second round exit, and a loss to Edmonton in 7 games. Jenna.
Yeah, definitely surprised at their performance despite Thatcher Demko, their Vezina candidate, being out and injured. They definitely showed that they can win big games with key injuries, and their star players that were underperforming, and definitely a sputtering power play. They were also missing Brock Besser, so that's another big part of their team, out with a blood clotting issue. So I was definitely impressed by their performance despite all that. I mean, that's a lot to take on as a team that could have went far if that didn't happen to them.
Colorado Avalanche next, 3rd in the Central, 8th in the NHL, 107 points. A second round exit in the loss to Dallas in 6 games. And Colin is the only one impressed. Myself, George, and Jenna both depressed. And this was a team that I had going quite a ways, and especially with the way they performed in the first round against the Jets. And then all of a sudden it seems like they get hit, T-boned by a dump truck driving in a Prius, and the Val Nichushkin suspension comes out, a major impact on this team. And now looking forward, you've got the question marks around Nichushkin, but not only that, Gabe Landeskog as well. Will he return? And in the event both of them do come back and Nichushkin gets cleared through the player assistance, Landeskog somehow can overcome this major injury that a lot of people have said is near impossible, but he says he's ready to play. That is a whole lot of cap that somehow the Avalanche have to decide what they're going to do with, whether that comes with a trade. It might have to be picking UFAs up and putting big name guys on waivers for anybody to take. But this team had so much potential in front of them. And with all of the thumbs down and the negative locker room energy that had to hit them there, thanks to, unfortunately, what happened to Nichushkin. And again, hopefully everything is going to work out for him and he'll be able to return. Hopefully the player can come out all right from an obvious personal problem. But for me, it was a big thumbs down. Colin, you were on the other side of that. The only guy here impressed.
Yeah, I mean, the team was a lot of fun to watch throughout the season. You love watching Nathan MacKinnon. Overall, if we're being real, there's probably not too much to be impressed about of this team this year. But I will say with what Makar did on a daily basis, what McKenna did on a daily basis, there were some positive moments throughout the year. Anytime Makar touched the puck, it was a positive moment for the Avalanche. And, I think they're still primed to be a good team next year. Maybe not as good, maybe not another 100-point season for them, but they're still primed with the guys that they got to be good next year. You mentioned the Nichushkin situation. It killed him. I mean, locker room wise, you can imagine, on the ice play wise, you can imagine and you could see. So that part was really tough. Obviously, a whole different type of situation there. But overall, obviously not too much to be smiling about. But I'll say the team was pretty fun to watch down the stretch and throughout the regular season.
The Edmonton Oilers are headed to the Stanley Cup Final, second in the Pacific after the regular season, ninth in the NHL, with 104 points and a unanimous decision among the group that everybody is by far impressed by the Edmonton Oilers, Colin.
Yeah, there's not much to say here other than that they're in that Stanley Cup. We're going to see McDavid in the Stanley Cup. We're going to see Draisaitl and Zach Hyman and everyone else do the incredible things that they do on the biggest stage in hockey. Also, something that's worth mentioning, and I think, Jenna, you mentioned this as well earlier, just the goaltending situation that Jack Campbell is being given all of this money and he's not their starting goaltender. It is Stuart Skinner who has carried them this far, and also the storyline of the coaching and Chris Knobloch, what he did when he took over. There's so much here that you can be impressed about as the season went on with the first half that the team had. Compare that to the second half that the team had. This is a true storybook run that is going on in Edmonton, and it could all be capped off by the first Canadian team to win the cup in a really, really long time. If they do pull that off, wouldn't that be something? That would be the story of the NHL for a few years if they could do that. But overall this season, McDavid putting up video game numbers with the 100 assist season and Draisaitl being a part of it as well. Zach Hyman, another big storyline, scoring 50 plus goals from 6 inches in front of the net. Like, all of this stuff is pretty cool, and the Oilers are just coasting along, and it's a fun ride to watch.
Nashville Predators, the wild card one in the West, 11th in the NHL after the regular season, 99 points, a first round exit, and a loss to Vancouver. And we're going to force George to defend both sides here of the personalities on the panel here. Everybody impressed between us, but George's brother not happy with the Nashville Predators.
Yeah, my brother's a Nashville transplant. He roots for the Rangers actively, but keeps a close eye on the local team. And he thought what Barry Trotz had done during the season, and something that we talked about in pre-production as well, was one of the things that we talk when we have conversations and the conversation turns to hockey. He's like, "Hey, did you hear Barry Trotz canceled the trip to the Vegas Sphere for the U2 concert?" So you're talking about a casual fan in Nashville, and that's what they talk about. By the way, don't ever refer to Smashville down there. Nobody buys into that down in Nashville. Even the casual fans in Nashville are like, why is Barry Trotz doing that? Well, because the team turned around and went 16-0-2 right after that and made their final push, and were able to get into the playoffs. But, so outside of that, like, the depressed part of him is not being able to go onto lower Broadway and enjoy the wobbly pops with all the fans down there. But I think we were all impressed for the right reasons, right? Juicy Saros proved that he was worth that money that he was given, the $5 million a year contract he was given. You had a few members of the D line which were aging, but they were still getting the job done. And of course, right after the playoffs, they get rid of Ryan McDonough. Represent. But it's a team where Roman Yossi. You take a look at the names up and down that roster, right? They're familiar to us. Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly was a great pickup for them, and he helped lead this team in the playoffs. So it's one of those things where, if they can get solid goaltending wire to wire, that's the question with UC Saros. That's always been the question with UC Saros. Can they get goaltending solidly out of him wire to wire to help push them into a conference final and maybe even a cup final?
Two more teams, and then we'll get to our Stanley Cup betting picks to close off the episode here. And unanimous for the last couple. This one is the LA Kings. Everybody with big time thumbs down. Third in the Pacific, 12th in the NHL, 99 points for the LA Kings, but a first round exit for the third straight year to the Edmonton Oilers in 5 games. And Jenna, thumbs down for you alongside of us.
Yeah, definitely an important factor to the game. They lost the special teams battle. They were unable to contain McDavid and Draisaitl, which many teams struggle with, but definitely that needs to happen in a playoff series. And I didn't see much from goaltending or Pierre-Luc Dubois, who carries a hefty contract for the Kings. So I needed to see something there, and I really didn't.
Moving on, the final team here is the Vegas Golden Knights. And I changed my stance here just to give an opposite opinion here, but originally everybody had thumbs down for the Vegas Golden Knights. Wildcard 2, 14th in the NHL, 98 points, a first round exit, a loss to Dallas in 7 games. And now with the long-term signing of Noah Hannafin and Tomas Hertl, a lot of question marks around now the team's leading scorer in Jonathan Marchessault. And in my opinion, really a big-time double bird to Marchessault by the management. And it looks like he'll unfortunately have to be on his way out unless he takes a discount and really doesn't deserve to do so. On the positive side, if you're going to try to take light out of it, I would go with the fact that they had so many injuries. This was a team that was up and down the leaderboard all year and made a big time push late in the season to just get to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And unfortunately for them, going up against the Dallas Stars, who are the number 1 team in the West, and the West was an absolute gong show. No matter who they would have had to go up against, they're either facing the Stars, they're facing the Oilers, or they're facing the Canucks, depending on where their wild card goes, or if they end up getting the number 2 or 3 seed inside of the conference. So it wasn't going to be easy. Dallas proved to be the better team. That's why they made it to the Western Conference. So that's where I waver between impressed and depressed. But for me, it's because of the handling of the contracts where Marchessault is on his way out. That is the big time negative in my opinion. Let's move on here and close it off with our betting segment and our picks of the week. And we'll throw it around here and start with George.
I have Sam Reinhart for most points in a series at plus 900. I know Jenna was talking about her and her Florida fan base being worried about whether or not Reinhart was going to come back. In my opinion, that's my pick of the week. But just to touch upon that contract, get rid of Montour, bring back Reinhart.
Jenna.
Yeah, I have my favorite player there, Carter Verhaeghe, 25 plus shots on goal in the series. It produces a lot, takes a lot of shots on goal, so I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Alan, your picks.
Yeah, I'll say for the most points scored, I will say Leon Draisaitl over Connor McDavid. The line at plus 320 there. McDavid obviously is going to contribute the assists. I think the Panthers are going to pay a little bit closer attention to him, allow Draisaitl to execute a little bit more effectively, plus 320 on that one.
And give some shout outs to some other members of our team who are not on actively here today, but our social media manager, Matt Leonardo, his pick was 0 shutouts throughout the season. And Nick Kozan, who is doing a phenomenal job running our blog that is up and running. If you're more of a reader than a listener, go check that out. He's got Carter Verhaeghe to have the most goals in the series, and also Connor McDavid to break the single postseason assist record. For me, this one feels like guaranteed money. Unfortunately, the odds aren't terribly great. The series over 5.5 games, I don't think there's any way that either side lets this series go down in less than 5. So even though it's minus 188, if you can find something else in the minus 200 range to parlay it with that you're confident, get it up over plus 100 odds. I think that is just free cash flow coming in on the over 5.5. Around the team here with our picks to round it out, and it's again pretty unanimous here. Every single one of us has the Florida Panthers in 6 games. Colin, you talked about this on Nesson earlier this week, but very confident about the Cats in 6.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like this is going to come back to bite us, no pun intended, because every single one of us has the Florida Panthers winning, and maybe McDavid's listening right now and he's like, okay, let me go sweep these fools. But that being said, I think what we talked about at the top of the episode, what I've been talking about a lot this week, is that the Panthers match up really, really well on the defensive side to the offensive side. And I think it's going to come down to the goaltending, and that's where the Panthers have that slight edge. And maybe it's even not so slight when it comes down to Bobrovsky and Stuart Skinner. And I think George made that excellent point that I'll mention again, that as this series goes along, the scales are going to tip further and further in favor of the Panthers. It's just the hard-nosed style of play that they have. Kachuk and Bennett are going to make things as miserable as possible for every single person out there on the ice in Oilers colors. So I think that's what it comes down to. And I think the Oilers will make this a series. It's not going to be a blowout, of course. These games are going to be close. But when the dust settles, when the fighting stops, I think the Panthers are going to be up on top in 6 games.
Fifth liners are going to have boots on the ground as Jenna is headed to Sunrise. She'll be down there as the Panthers take on Edmonton. Jenna, what are you most excited about as you look forward to hopefully a Cats in 6 pick hitting?
Well, all I have to say is I'm mostly nervous. My heart definitely gets beating pretty fast when I start thinking about it. But I'm most looking forward to, I guess, just seeing the building even more electric than last round. Last year's Stanley Cup Final was absolutely amazing there. I spent a lot of time there. And I'm hoping for my Panthers to win. Okay. We needed to prove ourselves. I used to go to games as a kid, and they would be pulling like 13,000 out of, I don't know, their 19-8 arena, I think it is. So I'm really excited for them, and they've definitely been proving themselves as of late, but I really need them to take that extra step, to say, hey, we're the Panthers. We're still in the NHL. Like, we're not a poverty franchise anymore. So I really have so much hope for them, and I really hope to see it come true.
And certainly excited not to have a disgusting number of blue shirts in a red arena for this round. George, close it off here. Cats in 6 for you as well.
It's going to go this series, as Colin already said, it's not going to be 4. It's not going to be a gentleman's sweep in 5. And that tells me, as I've already said at the beginning of the podcast, the deeper this goes, the more in favor it goes to Florida. And just to piggyback off of what Jenna was saying about Amarin Arena, it's in a perfect location, man. People are saying it's not Miami. It's not Fort Lauderdale. No, it's Sunrise, Florida. But you know what else it's on? It's right off of 95. Easy in, easy out, free parking, and you just walk across the street. Are you kidding me? Where else do you get that? Certainly not the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. That's beside the point. Panthers in 6, and it's because they're going to grind it out like they've done this entire season. And Paul Maurice is going to have this team more focused than they were last year in a Stanley Cup Final.
It's definitely not a question that this is one of the most exciting matchups in either side to win it here. You got Connor McDavid trying to cement his name in glory as one of, if not down the line, the best player in history, trying to chase Gretzky with the Oilers and all the cup magic that he had. The Florida Panthers trying to get it done for the first time. And can Canada bring the cup back? That is it here on episode 1 of the Fifth Liners podcast. A big thank you to everybody who tuned in here. Reach out to us on social media. Follow us at Fifth Liners podcast on Instagram, hopefully soon to be coming on Twitter, and continue to listen here on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Music. But pop the champagne. We are underway, and I just want to give big snaps out to everybody sitting here on this call. This was a crazy idea that came about in the shower, and in a span of about 2 weeks here, we have a fully running social media, and a big thank you as well to the guys behind the scenes, Marco Hidalgo, who's been just dominating on the production and everything anybody sees on YouTube and our social media here. Matt Leonardo, who's running our social medias, and Nick Kozan, who's helping with the advertising and doing all of our writing. Guys, I'm extremely grateful for all of the work that you guys have put in, and looking forward to many more to come here. That does it for episode 1. And we'll have another episode coming up after the Stanley Cup recap in a couple weeks. Thanks for tuning in.